What would you do if your neighbor hated your farm so much they built an illegal electric fence across your driveway? So powerful, it nearly killed you. This isn't just petty HOA drama. This is a real-life nightmare that ended in criminal charges, a courtroom showdown, and a community forever changed. Stick around, because this gets dark. If you told me 5 years ago that owning my family's farm could nearly cost me my life, I would have laughed. Or maybe not laughed. Just blinked at you in the quiet, knowing way that comes with generations of farmers who've seen everything. Blizzards, droughts, floods, but never what came for me next. The farm had been in our family for over 130 years. My great-grandfather carved the land out with callous hands and sheer will, laying claim to 300 acres of fertile Midwest soil that rolled out like a green carpet. It weathered wars, recessions, and even a brief locust infestation in the 1940s. But through it all, it stood unbothered, strong, resilient. My grandparents raised corn, soybeans, and 3 children here. My parents left the farm life behind for city jobs. But me? I always knew I'd come back. I loved the quiet, the smell of fresh-cut alfalfa, the low hum of crickets at night. When I turned 27, my grandparents passed the farm to me. It was already in the will. But I remember how my grandfather looked me in the eye when he said, "Don't ever let someone who's never worked a day on this land tell you what to do with it." Back then, I thought he meant politicians or tax collectors. I had no idea he meant people like her. You see, the land is a patchwork of utility and legacy, for sections divided with invisible lines known only to us. 3 huge plots for crops, corn in the north field, soybeans in the east and west, and 1 smaller section for family use, where my house sits nestled among shade trees, a red barn, and a cozy pasture that housed a couple dozen chickens, some ducks, and 3 lazy rabbits. The family section was the closest to civilization, if you could call it that. About a quarter-mile down the road, past a narrow strip of township-owned land, lay a freshly built neighborhood. At first, it seemed innocent enough. Beige houses popped up like mushrooms, each with picture-perfect lawns and identical mailboxes. I didn't pay them much attention. The nearest property line was still a good 1,300 feet from my home. I had fences, trees, and time on my side. But it wasn't long before I realized that not all neighbors move in peace. I remember the knock like it was yesterday. It was a Tuesday, mid-August, sun beating down, sweat clinging to my back from a long morning cleaning the coop. I was halfway through shelling corn by the porch when I heard it. 3 sharp knocks. The kind of knock you only hear from someone who believes the world owes them something. I opened the door to a woman in her late 60s, hair like brittle steel wool, pulled tight in a bun that threatened to snap. She wore a pastel blouse, pearls, and a scowl so sharp it could shave bark off a tree. "Are you the owner of this property?" she asked, emphasizing the last word like it had dirt on it. "I am," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "Something I can help you with?" She didn't answer right away, just looked past me, nostrils flaring as if she'd smelled manure. Which, to be fair, wasn't impossible. This is a farm, after all. "I'm Karen," she said, because of course she was president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, "and I've received multiple complaints about your land." "From who?" I asked, glancing down the road toward her spotless kingdom of suburban clones. She gave a dismissive wave. "That's not the point. Your property is unsightly. The smell, the noise, the animals. It's bringing down our home values." I almost laughed. "Ma'am, this farm's been here longer than your HOA's been a sparkle in a developer's eye." Karen's lips tightened. "You need to do something about it. Perhaps move the livestock out of view. Paint the barn. Cut the grass more often. Be considerate." "Respectfully," I said, try not to sound like I was mocking her, "you're a quarter-mile away. There's a tree line and a township lot in between. You don't even border my property." She took a step forward, her perfume cloud hitting me like an artificial flower shop. "The sight of this place is offensive. I have to drive by it every day, then take another route." Karen's face turned crimson. She huffed, turned on her heel, and stomped back to her car like an angry goose in heels. That should have been the end of it. I wish it had been. The first letter came 3 days later, tucked neatly into my mailbox in an envelope bearing the Willow Creek HOA logo. Not addressing me by name, just property owner. The letter was civil, even polite at first. As a valued neighbor, it read, "We respectfully request that you take steps to maintain your property in a way that reflects the pride of the surrounding community." I raised an eyebrow. Pride? The same community that paved over 2 forests to build pastel homes? Still, I didn't take it too seriously. The second letter arrived 2 days after that. This one less cordial, suggesting that my livestock was audibly disturbing residents, and that steps must be taken to reduce noise pollution. I chuckled. My ducks waddled around making soft quacks. My rabbits didn't make any noise. And I didn't own a rooster, never had. Then came the third letter, less of a request and more of a declaration. It accused me of violating an unspecified communal ordinance and vaguely warned of legal repercussions should I fail to respond. It was around that time I realized something important. They weren't trying to talk to me. They were trying to wear me down. Over the next 2 weeks, the letters didn't stop. If anything, they increased, sometimes 2 a day, always dropped off by hand. I never caught who delivered them. But I imagined Karen, sneaking up to my box like a suburban ninja, eyes darting, righteousness burning like napalm. The language in the letters grew more aggressive. They accused me of blighting the view, of refusing reasonable compromise, and of undermining neighborhood integrity. I stopped reading them after the 12th one. Still kept them all, though. Granddad always said, document everything when crazy people get involved. I didn't feel threatened. Not yet. Just annoyed. I didn't know then that the storm was coming. That someone in that HOA, drunk on authority and personal vendetta, would take things so far I'd end up in a hospital bed. Bones cracked, vision blurry, lucky to be breathing. But that's another part of the story. And trust me, it only gets worse from here. I had stopped reading the HOA letters. Dozens of them sat unopened on my desk. Threats dressed as etiquette. But I wasn't afraid, just tired. It felt like a game to someone, one I had no interest in playing. I should have known better. I remember waking up that Saturday morning to find another 2 envelopes jammed into my mailbox. Thin, stiff, stamped with that same smirking Willow Creek HOA logo. I took them inside and tossed them on the pile without a glance. The pile had grown to over 30 now, each one unopened, like paper-thin grenades waiting to go off. At first, I thought maybe they'd get bored. Maybe Karen had exhausted her vocabulary of passive-aggressive threats. But instead of stopping, they got weirder. One letter was handwritten. It reeked of floral perfume. Inside, "Do you even know what kind of disease rabbits can spread? Think of the children." Another was typed in red ink, all caps. "Remove all fowl. Waterfowl brings snakes." There were no snakes. I hadn't seen one in years. But suddenly, it wasn't about noise or aesthetics anymore. It was about fear, panic, manufactured hysteria. That's when I started to feel it. This wasn't just Karen venting. This was coordinated, a campaign. And something told me it was only just beginning. On Monday, I found myself squinting in a new letter. I broke my own rule and opened this one. It was stamped urgent. It read, "Multiple neighbors have reported disruptive noises believed to originate from your livestock. Prolonged animal disturbances are in violation of Section 14A of Willow Creek's Environmental Nuisance Guidelines." There was just one problem. I didn't live in Willow Creek. I didn't even share a boundary with it. Between us was a 400-foot buffer of township property, untouched land with overgrown trees and brush. That should have been enough separation for anyone, but it wasn't. And to make things even more absurd, my chickens were quiet. I had no rooster. My ducks were more polite than most of the HOA board. Still, I had the letter in my hand accusing me of animal terrorism, as if I were unleashing a flock of angry geese into their cul-de-sac. I started to laugh. Really laugh. That kind of tired, wheezing laugh you get when you've been awake too long and seen too much. But beneath the humor was something else growing. Dread. The next day, I got another envelope, this one thicker. It rattled when I shook it. Inside were 5 photos, taken with a zoom lens from some ridiculous distance. One showed my chicken coop. Another, my front porch. One had my wife pulling weeds in the garden. My stomach sank. None of the photos were on HOA property, which meant someone had either trespassed or used some high-powered camera from behind that tree line buffer. But what really chilled me was the final photo. It was a wide shot from behind of me on the tractor in the north field. A note scribbled on the back. "You're being watched. Clean it up." No signature. No return address. That night, I locked every door and installed motion lights across the front property. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but something had shifted. This wasn't neighborhood annoyance anymore. It was stalking. In the week that followed, the volume doubled, 2 to 3 letters a day. My wife stopped bringing in the mail. She didn't want to see them anymore. I made a game of it at first. I stacked the unopened ones on my office shelf like books, called it the Encyclopedia of Insanity. But the laughter faded fast. The contents, when I dared open a few, got darker. One suggested a petition to remove livestock through legal avenues. Another accused me of intentional psychological abuse of nearby families. One even quoted the Bible. A good neighbor is better than a distant brother. What did that even mean in this context? It wasn't just Karen anymore. It felt like the entire board had declared war on my existence. I spoke with a local lawyer just to get a temperature check. He read a few of the letters, leaned back, and said they don't have legal standing, not even close, but they might try to make your life hell until you leave. He wasn't wrong. I began parking my truck facing the road at night, just so I could catch a glimpse of anyone driving by. And then one evening, there she was, Karen, walking alone, clipboard in hand, stopping every 10 feet like she was inspecting a crime scene. She paused at the edge of the tree buffer, looked toward my house. Then, without warning, she raised her phone and took a picture. Click. She didn't even try to be discreet. I opened the door and stepped onto porch. "Can I help you?" I called out, making no effort to hide the irritation in my voice. She didn't flinch, just gave me a tight, plastic smile. Just doing my duty. To who? I asked. You don't even have jurisdiction here. Karen just turned around and walked back toward the road like nothing happened. I called the township office the next day, explained what was going on. The clerk there sighed. I could almost hear the eye roll over the phone. "Yeah," she said. "We've got a few complaints from Willow Creek residents, but they're not legally allowed to enforce anything off their land." I asked if they'd talked to Karen. Several times, the clerk replied, "She's persistent." Persistent. That's one word for it. Another word? Obsessed. Karen was no longer just a nuisance. She was watching us, documenting us, and rallying HOA board members like soldiers in a personal war. The letters, the photos, the threats, they weren't just warnings. They were blueprints for something bigger. I just didn't realize how far she was willing to go, until it was almost too late. It was the kind of evening that hums with normalcy, the sort that lulls you into believing tomorrow will look just like today. I had spent most of that afternoon at the feed supply store 2 towns over. We were restocking hay, cracked corn, and a few meds for the chickens. It took longer than I'd expected. Long lines, a wrong item, a detour to pick up wire mesh. By the time I was back on the road, the sun had dipped below the trees. Dust painted everything in muted purples and burnt oranges. The road home curled through a corridor of dense trees. I drove it every day, knew every bend, every pothole, every inch of that asphalt. I didn't think twice as I approached the familiar turn onto my gravel driveway. But what happened next is burned into my brain like a brand. As my headlight swung across the curve, I saw it, a sudden, blinding flash. A web of white-hot light burst across my windshield like a firework, exploding inside the car. And then impact, a sound like thunder cracking against steel. Glass splintered. My neck snapped forward, then back. The seatbelt crushed against my ribs. Then darkness. I came to slowly. First the beeping, rhythmic, soft, then voices, muffled, Someone saying my name. The world smelled sterile. Plastic and antiseptic. I opened my eyes. Blurry shapes coalesced into ceiling tiles. White, square, endless. My lips were cracked. My throat was sandpaper. "You're awake," someone said. It was a nurse. Young, kind eyes, clipboard in hand. "Do you remember what happened?" I tried to speak, but it came out like a groan. My body screamed in protest. Everything hurt. They told me I'd been unconscious for nearly 24 hours. I crashed into a fence. A live, electric one. The doctors were amazed I'd survived. Concussion, 2 broken ribs, dislocated shoulder, fractured wrist. If I hadn't been wearing a seatbelt, they said, I would have gone straight through the windshield. But the phrase that kept echoing in my head was electric fence. I didn't have a fence near the road. So where the hell had it come from? My wife arrived later that night. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but she smiled when she saw me. She took my hand gently, afraid to hurt me. "I thought I lost you." I tried to ask about the fence, but my voice came out raspy. She leaned in, her voice low. "They put up a fence," she whispered. "A real one, around property line, parts of it near the road. But it wasn't just a fence." She paused. It was electric, homemade, crude, wires everywhere, no warning signs. And they put it across the driveway. You hit it full speed. I blinked, trying to process it. She continued. The fire department had to shut it down. It was rigged to a car battery and a solar inverter. No grounding, no safety, just raw current. Then she looked at me, eyes fierce now. The paramedics said if you touched it with your bare skin before the car broke through, it might have killed you. I wanted to scream, not out of pain, but rage. Someone had tried to box me in, trap me, or worse. 2 officers came to speak with my wife at the hospital. I was too groggy to follow everything, but I remember snippets. No known permit, no record of construction, no notice filed with the township. Whoever did this had done it illegally, quietly. They had waited until I left the property, then built the fence in daylight or under cover of night. The design wasn't industrial. It was something you find on a survivalist forum. A trap, not a boundary. And they didn't just place it near the property line. They blocked my driveway. That wasn't just illegal. That was personal. And whoever did it knowing full well I'd drive through it. Probably at night. Probably fast. 2 days later, the police came back. With a detective this time. He sat beside me, notepad in hand, eyes sharp. "We're treating this as a criminal investigation," he said. "Reckless endangerment. Maybe worse." "Worse." I croaked. He nodded. "You were injured in an unmarked, electrified barrier. There's evidence it was rigged to trigger on vehicle impact. That could point toward intent." Intent. That word echoed in my skull. This wasn't just a protest. Or a message. This was a move. A deliberate strike meant to injure, frighten, or end me. My wife handed over every HOA letter we'd saved. Over 50 of them. Most unopened. The detective flipped through them, frowning deeper with each one. Then we showed him the photos. The red ink threats. The note that said, "You're being watched." I told him about Karen. About the clipboard walks. The direct confrontation. He looked up slowly. "Do you know anyone on the Willow Creek board with electrical experience? Or maybe someone who could have built this thing?" I nodded once. "No idea, but I know exactly where to start looking. I survived a crash that should have killed me. Someone had erected an illegal live electric fence across my driveway, and I drove straight into it at full speed. The detective said it wasn't just reckless. It looked intentional, and I had a pretty good idea who might have done it. The day after the detective visited me in the hospital, I made the call. My voice still rasped with pain, and I had to brace my side every time I took a breath. But I dialed the non-emergency line for the county sheriff's department and requested a formal interview. "I'm ready to file a full report," I told them. Names, evidence, all of it. They sent 2 officers and a crime scene tech to my home. My wife walked them through everything I collected before the accident. She'd organized the letters while I was unconscious, labeled and dated them. Even pulled up the trail camera footage I'd set up weeks ago, the ones I'd almost forgotten about. One clip stood out. Karen, caught midday, standing on the buffer land with a tape measure and a notepad. She wasn't technically on my property, but she was staring directly at my fence line, where the electric fence later appeared. It wasn't enough to prove she built it, but it was enough to confirm she had been scoping the area. The tech took photos of the crash site. They collected pieces of the fence, wires, car battery clamps, everything. I gave the police the original photos we'd received, especially the one of me on the tractor. And then I told them the truth. I believe Karen from Willow Creek's HOA is behind this, or she hired someone to do it for her. The detective nodded solemnly. We'll look into it. This isn't just code enforcement drama anymore. I spent 3 more weeks in the hospital. Long days. Longer nights. Nurses changed my dressings. Surgeons stabilized my wrist and shoulder. But it wasn't the pain that kept me awake. It was the why. Why would someone go to these lengths? Over what? Property values? A view? It felt surreal. Like I was trapped in a low-budget thriller. Except I couldn't get up and walk away. Every time a nurse touched my ribs, I remember the impact, the crunch, the way the light exploded like lightning through my windshield. The doctors said my seatbelt saved me, but if I'd been just 5 miles faster, or if I hadn't braked when I did, things might have ended differently. My wife visited every evening, bringing updates from the police. They were narrowing things down, questioning the HOA board, even the contractor Karen used for landscaping. But nothing concrete. Not yet. Still, I could feel it. The net was tightening. On the day I was cleared for discharge, my wife brought me an envelope. It came the day after your crash, she said, her eyes flickering. I didn't open it until yesterday. It was another Willow Creek HOA letter. Only this one wasn't typed. It was handwritten. Messy. Rushed. It read, "Failure to comply has left us no choice. If you cannot respect community standards, then proper measures will be taken to keep you and your animals contained." My blood ran cold. It wasn't just a veiled threat anymore. It was a confession, disguised in HOA doublespeak. Proper measures. Contained. It confirmed everything I'd feared. This wasn't about aesthetics. This wasn't about property lines. This was personal. That night, back home in the quiet of our living room, my wife and I sat in silence. The lights were low. The house felt too big, too empty. "I can't live like this," she said softly. "What happens next time? What if it's not a fence? What if it's something worse?" I looked at her, the fear in her eyes, the exhaustion written across her face. "I want to fight," I said finally, "but only if you're with me." She reached over, took my hand, and squeezed. "We're in this together." We called the detective first thing in the morning, gave him the letter. He scanned it, jaw tightening. "We're escalating this," he said. "We'll run handwriting analysis, and we're going to subpoena HOA meeting minutes, neighborhood surveillance, all of it. Do I need a lawyer?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "Yes." Within 48 hours, my statement was formalized. The county opened a case file titled "Suspected Criminal Negligence and Reckless Endangerment Involving Unauthorized Electrical Installation on Private Property." I handed over all 67 letters, my wife's catalog of timestamps, the photos, the trail cam footage. The detective brought in a forensic handwriting analyst who compared the threatening letter to a neighborhood petition Karen had previously submitted to the township. It was a 98% match. That alone wasn't enough to convict, but it was enough to obtain a warrant. Police searched Karen's home a few days later. They found schematics for an electric fence printed off from an online forum, handwritten notes with measurements that matched my driveway, and receipts, a car battery, wires, wooden stakes, a solar inverter, all purchased under her name, all paid in cash. The pieces were falling into place, and soon we would see exactly how far this woman, this neighbor, had gone to get rid of us. Police executed a warrant on Karen's property. They found receipts, blueprints, and physical evidence tying her to the illegal electric fence that nearly killed me. The pieces were coming together, and I was finally ready to take my stand. I thought the search of Karen's house would be the climax, the big moment, but it was only the beginning. The police weren't just after Karen. They wanted to know if anyone else in the Willow Creek HOA was involved. The detective returned to our house 2 days after the warrant. He wore that look that seasoned officers have when they're circling something big, but still waiting for the final piece to drop. "We pulled the HOA's internal meeting minutes," he said. "And let's just say Karen's name is all over them." Apparently, she had been pushing a motion for perimeter protection against agricultural encroachment. That was her euphemism for my farm. Most of the board didn't take her seriously. She had no jurisdiction outside Willow Creek. But that didn't stop her. She even wrote proposals for community-funded fencing to preserve neighborhood aesthetics. It sounded bureaucratic, innocuous, but the intent was there, in her tone and her persistence. The detective leaned forward. And here's where it gets interesting. She didn't want a fence on the HOA's boundary. She insisted it should follow your driveway. That was the smoking gun they needed. Not just obsession, but fixation. She knew what she was doing, he said, and she was planning it for months. Within 48 hours of the evidence review, Karen was brought in for questioning. She didn't go quietly. From what I was told, she stormed into the station like she owned it, demanded a lawyer, and started spouting off about community preservation and land use morality. But the evidence was overwhelming. Receipts, fence design printouts, a petition she drafted weeks before the fence appeared, littered with thinly veiled threats. And that letter, the one we'd received after the crash, a forensic match to her handwriting. The nail in the coffin, surveillance footage from a neighbor in Willow Creek. A blurry video, grainy, late afternoon, but clearly showing a woman matching Karen's build, dragging stakes and wire through the township buffer land. No hard hat, no permit, just quiet determination and a twisted agenda. The police brought her back in. This time, they charged her. The press picked up the story fast. Local HOA president arrested for electric fence incident. The headline screamed. Karen's mugshot was everywhere. But when questioned, she doubled down. She told reporters she had acted in the interest of the community and that non-residential nuisances have no place near modern developments. She painted herself as a crusader, a martyr for property values. She wouldn't stop talking, the detective told me later. Didn't even deny it, just kept saying she was protecting the children. Protecting them from what? Chickens? Soybeans? The occasional duck waddling too close to a fence line? She actually said, and I quote, "I did what no one else had the guts to do. If we let rural sprawl infect our suburbs, we'll lose everything that makes our neighborhood safe. No remorse, no accountability, just narcissism wrapped in neighborhood politics." The charges came swift and heavy. Reckless endangerment, trespassing, illegal construction without permit, harassment, conspiracy to commit bodily harm. And because she had paid someone under the table to help install the fence, that person, a local handyman, was also arrested. He confessed almost immediately. Said Karen promised him a couple $100 and a good review on the community bulletin. He didn't know it was going to be electrified, but she did. The case was airtight. Still, I felt no peace. Not yet. Not until the gavel dropped. Not until I looked her in the eye across a courtroom. We filed a civil suit the following week. My lawyer was sharp, quiet, and lethal when he needed to be. He'd seen cases like this. Unhinged neighbors who cross lines they can't uncross. Karen tried to countersue, of course. Claimed I was creating division, provoking hostility, and refusing reasonable compromise. But her case fell apart faster than a sandcastle in a rainstorm. The HOA board formally disavowed her. They released a public statement condemning her actions and announcing her removal as board president. The trial date was set. It wasn't just about damages. It was about precedent. I wasn't suing because I was angry. I was suing because no one should have to live in fear on their own land. No one should wonder if a bitter neighbor with too much free time might turn a zoning dispute into attempted murder. The day I walked into the courtroom, my side still sore, my wrist still healing, I didn't feel nervous. I felt ready. This was more than justice. It was closure. Karen had been arrested, charged, exposed. The community turned against her. The HOA stripped her title, and I filed a civil lawsuit. Now, with physical and emotional scars still healing, I walked into the courtroom for the final showdown, ready to end it. The trial began on a Tuesday morning. The courtroom wasn't packed, but it wasn't empty either. A few local reporters sat near the back, scribbling notes. Some of my neighbors had come, both from Willow Creek and outside it. A strange show of solidarity. Some looked at me with pity, others respect. Karen sat at the defense table, still wearing that pale pink blazer, like she was heading to a brunch. Not a criminal trial. Her lips were pursed, her arms folded, but the fire in her eyes had dimmed. What had once been self-righteousness now looked a lot like fear. Her lawyer made a weak attempt at sympathy, called her misguided but well-meaning, claimed she did not intend for any harm to come to plaintiff. But the prosecution didn't let that narrative breathe. They presented the timeline like a precision blade. Letters, dozens of them, spanning months. The photos, the trail cam footage, the fence schematics, the hardware receipts, the handwritten threat, the surveillance footage of her installing the fence herself. Then came the testimony. The handyman she'd hired took the stand. He looked like a man who regretted ever answering his phone. She told me it was just to keep animals out, he said. But when I saw the wires, the power source, I asked her if it was legal. She told me not to ask questions. The prosecutor leaned in. Did you know it was electrified? He shook his head. No, I figured she was bluffing. Until I saw sparks when I helped test it. That got a visible reaction from the jury, and from Karen, who suddenly looked like she might throw up. But the moment everything changed was when they played the dash cam footage. My truck flying down the road, the curve, the blinding flash of white, the crash, silence. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. I turned to look at the jury. Some stared at me, wide-eyed. One woman had a hand over her mouth. Another scribbled furiously in her notebook. When I took the stand, I told them the truth. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted to be left alone. My family has owned that land for over a century. We've never hurt anyone. But this wasn't about fences or aesthetics. This was about control. And I nearly died because someone couldn't stand the sight of a barn. It was silent when I stepped down, and that silence spoke louder than anything else. The verdict came fast. Guilty on all counts. Karen's sentence wasn't lengthy. 2 years in county jail, probation afterward, and mandatory restitution. But it wasn't the prison time that hit hardest. It was a shame. Her name was plastered across every local news site. HOA president sentenced in electric fence assault. Suburban feud turns criminal. Attempt at neighborhood cleanup nearly kills farm owner. The HOA issued another public apology. Their new president, a soft-spoken man named Tom, called me personally. I know we can't undo what happened, he said, but we've changed. We've rewritten our charter. You were right to stand up for yourself. People I'd never met before started stopping by the farm. One woman left a basket of muffins on our porch with a note for the farmer who reminded the town what boundaries really mean. Another neighbor, from Willow Creek itself, put a sign in his yard that read, "We support the farm." For a long time, I didn't know what to make of it. All I'd ever wanted was peace. But now, somehow, I had become a symbol. Winning didn't erase the fear. I still flinch at certain noises. I still slowed down every time I approached a curve in the road, where the fence had nearly ended my life. But slowly, the tension eased. I went back to tending the crops, feeding the chickens, fixing the old mower that kept stalling out near the duck pond. My wife and I started sitting on the porch again, drinking coffee in the mornings, watching the sunrise. There were no more letters in the mailbox, no more cameras pointed at our land, no more Karen hiding behind bureaucracy. But scars don't vanish overnight. I still think about what might have happened if I hadn't worn that seatbelt, if I'd gotten home a few minutes earlier, if she'd built the fence a few feet deeper. I think about how close I came to never seeing another sunrise. And then I think about how damn lucky I am to still be here. A few months after the trial, something unexpected arrived in the mail. An invitation from the township. They were holding a land heritage celebration, honoring families that had maintained generational farms through modern development. My family's name was on the list. I almost didn't go, but my wife insisted. "It's time," she said. "Let them see who you really are, not just a guy in the news." So I went, wore my nicest boots, spoke a few words to the crowd, thanked them for recognizing the value of tradition, of history, of grit. Afterward, a small boy came up to me and said, "You're the farmer who beat the electric lady, right?" I laughed so hard, I nearly dropped my coffee. And maybe that's all the legacy I needed. People like Karen think they can rewrite the world around them. They think their vision, their rules, their boundaries are more important than the lives they affect. But land is more than just dirt. It's memory, legacy, survival. You don't get to erase that because you don't like how it looks. I learned something through all this. Silence is peace. But sometimes silence becomes permission. And when someone threatens what you love, your family, your history, your home, you don't stay silent. You stand up, even when it hurts, even when it's dangerous. Because some fences are meant to keep people safe. But others, they're meant to be torn down.